Good afternoon, and thank you for attending Talk is Cheap, Antiracism is the Work webinar. My name is Idella Winfield. I am the Administrative Coordinator for the Christian Reformed Church Office of Race Relations. This webinar is a collaboration between the Christian Reformed Church Office of Race Relations and the Office of Social Justice. The Office of Social Justice helps Christian Reformed members love their neighbors in tangible ways. They provide resources and learn about the root causes of poverty, hunger, and oppression. And they empower the church to call on those in power to improve systems and enact just public policy. Office of Social Justice prioritizes the perspective of marginalized people most impacted by injustices and prompt advocacy. The Office of Race Relations resource Christian Reformed members and congregations as they dismantle the cause and effect of racism within the body of believers and throughout the world. As a denomination, we believe that dismantling racism is not peripheral to Christian calling. It's a gospel issue. But this will be about an hour-long webinar. The panelists will speak for about 45 minutes and we'll spend the rest of the time in Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions in the chat. This will also be recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording in the next day or so. And now I'll introduce the panel to you. Andrew Oppong is the Office of Social Justice, Creation Care, and Climate Change Specialist. Melissa Stek is the Office of Social Justice, Immigration Specialist. Viviana Cornejo is the Race Relations Advocate. And now I'll turn it over to Viviana.
Well, thank you, and welcome everybody, and Happy New Year to you too. I hope that you receive new things this year and we can dream at least that the COVID could be something of the past. One of the things that we would like to talk and chat a little bit about is why we have the title that we have. The talk is cheap. And I remember when we were thinking and planning this session, Melissa came with the title. And we said, that's perfect. It's perfect because people love to talk, but not to do too much. And that's what we want to talk. And why it's difficult and why it requires energy and dedication. Normally, we try to look to fix things very quickly. And we try to look to fix things very quickly. Normally, we don't spend much time in whatever we are fixing. But the work of anti-racism is way more than that. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, maybe we can talk a little more.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Maybe for some of you, it's morning, depending on your time zone. But yeah, glad to be here to have this conversation. Yeah, I think to start off, it's, you know, moving from just talking about racism to doing anti-racism. That's a big hurdle to overcome. I think when I was first learning about dynamics and systems of racism and anti-racism, not until college, really. You know, it wasn't brought up in my education K through 12. And when I started learning about it in college, it really wasn't through all of those years since then. It really wasn't until recent years that I started to make that transition from just thinking about, learning about, into actually doing things that cost me something, doing things that require work and require discomfort. So that's a big hurdle for a lot of folks to overcome, myself included. I've experienced a lot of my own fragility working through that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just to piggyback on that. I think it's trying to move from just talking about racism to anti-racism, like we said in the premise of the title. It's work. It's something that is difficult to do for everyone, because now, just like Melissa said, it's putting yourself in a place where you are going against the current, you're going against the norm, you're going against something. And when you're going against something, there's kind of a cost factor in there. And so I think when you pose the question, how do we move from just talking about it to actually doing it? I think personally for me, and I think most people who have been doing this work for a long time would say, you have to prepare yourself that this is going to hurt. So quote unquote, it's going to be uncomfortable. And I really love our former colleague, Kooyman, who wrote an article and just titled it, "This is Going to Hurt." And she was talking about her personal experiences, sort of entering the space of anti-racism. So I think there is a cost factor that needs to be accepted. And that's not easy. Nobody wants to be put in that vulnerable, hard, exposed space. But I think that is the prerequisite, because again, you're going against the current. And if you're a white person, you're going against yourself, so to speak. You're going against your privilege, you're going against a lot of things. So I think part of moving in this direction is just coming to a place of acceptance and saying, it's going to hurt, it's going to be difficult, but we commit ourselves to difficult things. I always say that it's almost like likening it to, I don't know, marriage, because you wake up each day making a commitment to your partner and saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And it doesn't mean that you are kumbaya with your partner and everything is just so great, that there's nothing that is uncomfortable, but each day you make a commitment to stick to it. And I think that's how we should view this work, in my opinion.
Right. I mean, if we think also like as Christians, when we accept the Lord as our Savior and as the Lord, we are in this process of walking with Him, right? And getting more and more, try to reflect who is He to be in our lives. And as you are saying, Andrew, every day we have to decide, I'm going to do this because I'm a Christian, because I want you, to Lord, to guide my life. And I want to reflect you in my life. And every day we're walking. And normally we call it sanctification. But it seems that we have the tendency to separate specifically this work of anti-racism from our Christian life, which is mainly to be a follower of Jesus. And what Jesus did was what you were saying, going against the current all the time. I don't know if you ever have been in a river going against the current. It's quite difficult to walk. I mean, nobody's saying that it's an easy walk. It's difficult, requires lots of denying yourself, lots of introspection, lots of repentance, humbleness, dedication. It requires to grow. And for us to grow is what we always call about the growing pains, right? Basically, that's what it is. And it seems that the church today likes to take the easy way, it seems like to me. At least that's what I say, what I think. Every time I do facilitations, and I have done quite a lot, the first thing that I hear at the end of the workshop is said, okay, what is the next step? How can I do? How can I fix this? Like boom, 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 boom. And so we have to say, wait, you have to do the learning first. It has to start with you first. Then you can think and fixing the system.
Yeah. I think I agree with that, Vivi. It's and one can argue to an extent that it's like, I think we've said this before, almost like a reflection of our culture. Like their drive-through, everything is drive-through. Literally everything is a quick fix. You don't want to get into the restaurant, you just have to like drive through. Everything is moving quickly and wanting to fix it, and a quick fix. And I think it's the idea of putting yourself that it's a journey. This is a journey commitment, and moving into that way. It's not going to be a quick fix. And I think we always say that, and just to preface it, it's like, we are not here to give this sort of magical recipe. I said this the other time, magical recipe of like, this is it, like I said this, I think yesterday, 2 ounces of being woke, and three cups of like being progressive or that. No, it's there's no magical recipe of a quick fix in that. It's a long-term commitment that you need to put yourself in. And before you even move into like, okay, let's fix it, well, there are certain foundational things that people need to understand and need to be on the same page, because sometimes it feels like we're talking on different islands, like we have no conception of what's happening. And so we're not even talking with each other. So there are certain foundational things that people need to learn. So yeah, I resonate with that idea of, well, let's fix it. Well, let's fix it. Yes. And that quick manner of like, let's move in that direction. Yeah.
And you know what, talking about foundational, and it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or any other religion. I mean, this is just as a simple person. If you know how the history of racism and whiteness began in this country, you can then understand why we are in the way we are here right now. And to learn that, you don't have to belong to any church. You just start doing the learning. And for us to remove that, it may be overwhelming. But if we don't take the step in learning our history, our true history, not the one that is fixed, not the one that is nice and a lot of flowers and sugar, no, not that one, the real one, we will be able to fight this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me, not because I love history, but but it seems to me.
Yes. Well, those of us that know you, we do know that you love history, Vivi. And yeah, I think to add to that and to add to what I was saying before, learning the truth about the history is absolutely necessary. And I think for those of us who are white, putting in the work to discover what our blind spots are is necessary. I think a lot of us feel like because we are good people, or we feel like we are good people, that maybe we're exempt from this being our problem, because part of the way that white supremacy is perpetuated is that we get into thinking that like being racist, if someone calls you a racist, it means you're a bad person.
Right.
But if we can differentiate that and say, no, this is about cooperation with systems, then it doesn't have to be about me personally. It's about whether or not I am cooperating in my day-to-day, and what are the ways that I do cooperate. I mean, I've had to catch in myself the ways that I now realize that in my brain, I am quicker to be harder on colleagues of color or other folks of color. And in those same situations with white folks, I think of the benefit of the doubt. I think of them more as like, oh, well, what about this? Well, they're probably going through that. My brain has been conditioned because of the racist water that we swim in this society to go there. And it wasn't until recent years that I recognized that that's something that I do. And that's the like ugly rooting out that especially we white folks have to do. And then even beyond that, you know, so there's the learning the truth, there's the self-reflection, and then there's the taking action. And I think like those previous two steps are super uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm, we'd rather just jump ahead to the action. We don't want to do that, like identify my own sins, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's a really important point you raised, Melissa. And I will even add one step further to like the process you outlined, in that I saw this somewhere and I was really convicted by it, because I think in I would say last year, and with the events of last year and all the, I would say, racial reckoning that happened, we saw that there is that idea that, well, proximity to marginalized identities. Like I have colleagues, I have friends, and there was this quote somewhere where it said, your proximity to marginalized identities doesn't make you immune from doing harm to them. And I think that's the part that it comes again. as this is a constant, this is not a place where you've reached a destination and then you're set.
Right.
It's just like what Melissa was describing. It's a constant introspection of reflection, of trying to wake up and say, I'm doing better. And there isn't this sort of pinnacle or like Zion point you reach and then that's it and it's over, because you can be so close. Your proximity to marginalized identities can be so close, and yet it doesn't mean you're immune from doing harm. And that shows how pervasive the sin of racism is in our lives. And as Melissa put it, the water we're swimming in. So I think it's very key to always do that constant interrogation. But then that's where it comes, people are like, well, how do I always keep having to like check myself, and that's the work of it, unfortunately, because it's so, again, going against the current, it's so dominant that sometimes you don't even realize that it's happening. But then to go against the current, you have to have that constant introspection in there. So I think that's something we need to highlight as well.
Yeah. I remember when I moved to this country some years ago in '95, and I started looking about the racism in here and how it worked. First, I couldn't understand well why was everything happening in here and why people are reacting in that way towards me. I mean, I haven't done anything wrong to you. Why are you telling me this thing? Why are you having these behaviors? And I think there's a work for both sides, if you want to call it sides. For the white people, they have a specific task that they have to be doing every single day. And for us, people of color, the same. Because what I noticed, and it happened to me too in the beginning, I got angry and I started fighting. And then there's no dialogue. And if there's no dialogue, you cut the conversation, you're done. And that's why, because a lot of people say, what's the point to learn? I know what happened to me every single day. Yes, of course I know. But the learning gives you the foundation to have a dialogue with the other person. And I think that opens doors to have decent conversations, because I can hear you, you can hear me. And that's part of the journey again, the walking together.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, it's like there is a kind of humility that needs to be adopted in this, because there are so many things that sometimes we hope it could be better, but like a posture of humbleness and humility, and as Christians and as people of faith, that's something that we need to have even in this very difficult process. And so it's because it's a tension. You want people who are convicted want to do something, but sometimes you make mistakes, and we're hoping that those mistakes are not consequential, and because some mistakes are very consequential. And last year we saw again the racial reckoning happening over summer, where sometimes that cost is so great. But in the same vein, there is a kind of humility posture, again, speaking through the lens of faith, that we need to adopt in this conversation and in doing that, because at the end of the day, how we live together matters. And in as much as we want to eradicate and move past the sin of racism, we need to be able to have sometimes a humility posture. I think that is also very important moving forward.
Do you think that to become an anti-racist person is an option?
I think you can do the work of anti-racism but it's not a fixed identity, right? Like, because there are days that I am racist, that I am allowing the status quo, either allowing the status quo to be in place, or I'm participating in maintaining the status quo. Or there's other days that I am being proactive and being anti-racist. So I think, yeah, I think of it more as the action more than the being, which is, I think, something we need to get away from so that we don't fall into these traps of thinking, this is about whether or not I'm a good or a bad person. That's that's like a trap that
Yeah.
ends the conversation for a lot of people, because they're like, I don't want to be seen as a bad person. End of discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, if I'm answering this question as a Black man in America, there isn't the option of and I think that's where sometimes, again, even in this dynamics, we need to be aware of it, that in the anti-racism work, well, people of color do not have the option. Vivi, you and I cannot walk out and say, okay, well, today we're taking it off. Today we are, yep, that the way you navigate the world is that's your identity right now. And so you do not walk outside and say today, well, I'm taking a break, I'm taking a vacation from it, even if you want to, as a person of color, because again, there's that trauma always going through and always being expected to be someone else's racism consultant, quote unquote. But you don't have the choice sometimes as a person of color. You really do not have it, because it literally is your reality and your lived experience. And so even white folks who have been doing this work for years, who are active anti-racist, the hope is they're doing it every time, but sometimes they have that option sometimes to take a step back if they can. But people of color do not have that option to take that step back, because it's that lived experience. And it's something that if we were talking in the spirit of people of faith, I think it's hard to say I'm opting out and this is not something that I want to do. Because again, with a Christian, if we're speaking through the Christian Reformed Church, at least we have said that racism is sin. It's evil, it's clear. And so as a person of faith, as a Christian, in your walk with God, you do not have that option to sit it out, I think. It's something that it's hard, and sometimes it's messy and it's vulnerable and you're exposed, but then it's part of it. You need to do, and that's why I think we need to know that it's difficult work. It's not something that is just easy and it's a breeze through, because like you said, talk is cheap. Exactly that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking on that because like last year, we can say last year now, in summer, when we saw that horrible video of George Floyd, everybody reacted. And it was like a boom in our offices where we were bombarded with emails and phone calls. But now it's like going down, because it's not affecting certain group of people, but although it keeps affecting people of color all the time. So that's why I think it seems that it's an option for some and not for others. But when you talk to white people specifically, they say, no, but I'm learning, but I'm doing this, but I'm doing that. But in reality, you can see that, yeah, you may be doing this, but you still have an option. It's not a commitment. And in this, to really be in a journey, you need to commit yourself in something like this. It's like you were saying, I mean, if in your marriage, you want to become with gray hair and all that, you need to be committed to the person, right? Committed to and I wonder if white people in this country are really committed to that. It's like, oh, I want to play piano, but I don't want to study the lessons. It doesn't work. So yeah, there's so many questions sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for us white folks, myself included, like I'm always giving this caveat of myself included, because the reason I've had these thoughts is because I've gone through this mess myself and thinking through these things personally, that it's pertinent to ask the question of, am I doing or saying this thing about justice for Black lives? Am I participating in this? Am I resharing this, whatever, to really ask ourselves the question, am I saying this, doing this because it makes me look like a good white person, or because I actually want to change something? Like reposting a post doesn't cost you much. It doesn't really change things. But are you willing to be a person, on the other hand, are you willing to be a person in the workplace that nuances a conversation for someone else to help them understand how what they said was harmful, or to point out that that the way that things are working in the dynamics of your office are giving more weight and value and voice to the white staff than the people of color on the staff. You know, those are the moments that we need to lean into, the things that tap us on the shoulder and say, like, here's the right thing that you should do. And then there's a part of you that puts up this resistance of like, oh, but that would be uncomfortable, or oh, that would, I think that's an indicator for the thing that you need to do.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you made a reference, Vivi, to sort of the moments where it's almost like acceptable that you need to be speaking and screaming, and that's where you need to have your voice out there. And so those are like almost like the trendy moments. And so you have like corporations, I don't know, changing their logos, putting on things like saying like, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And if that is occasioned by an event, something that went viral. And so we have from Breonna Taylor to Ahmaud Arbery to George Floyd. And so those are moments, again, where it's almost like the ebb and flow. It's like, yes, well, as a person, yeah, like I cannot be quiet, because again, the risk benefit analysis is almost like, again, in our culture that pushes in that way. It's like, you cannot be quiet in this moment. And so it's less risky to make that post, to put it out there, because everyone is talking about it. Everyone was talking about George Floyd. Everyone was talking about Breonna Taylor. And those are moments, and it almost becomes a trendy thing. So when I talk to other people of color, it's like, well, our lived experiences and realities are not trends where this is the time. So it's like beyond that hashtag activism of like moving in that direction. This is the moment. It's less risky. Everyone is saying it, so why don't I say it too? But we need to move through. Again, that's why we say it's a journey. It's a commitment. It's a lifestyle. Moving into each day, making that commitment, because again, you cannot suspend your lived experience as a person of color and say, well, this is it. And people, I had so much frustrations where people are like, well, people are putting out all these statements, denouncing this, and that's just isolated to the moment. But what happens when the camera is not rolling? What happens when it's not a viral moment? And those are the little moments, like what Melissa was describing. Can you nuance a conversation at work where you can stand for something that was wrong? Stand for something that's right by pointing something that was wrong. Those are those hard moments, because again, you're putting yourself out there, you're being vulnerable. You don't have the safety net of everyone is being woke and everyone is doing that. And so I think, again, it comes back to that commitment and waking up each day and saying, I am committing to this journey, this lifestyle, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. What is interesting in this is, and now with the pandemic, we are seeing how people like to live comfortable and not be making any sacrifices. Like, oh, I cannot go outside. Oh, I cannot have vacations. Oh, I can give me my rights. I don't want a mask. And that is reflected also in how we deal with racism. Is if it's comfortable to me and I feel okay dealing with this, I'm gonna deal with racism. But if not, no, I don't want to wear the mask. And the church is also reflecting the same, and that's a concern, I think. Because to be honest, in summaries, when we receive lots of email from congregations and churches as compared, and for how long are we existing, our offices? For quite a bit. And there's so many questions. And like, for instance, Melissa, as a white person, what do you think is the most difficult thing to do? Like the other day I was talking to my granddaughter. She's 16, is gonna turn 16. And I got in conversation with some of their friends. And I asked them, do you talk about racism and things like that, injustices and that kind of sort at your dinner table? Oh, no, we have nice conversations. So again, we don't like to be bothered. And if we have that deep inside us, and if this society has deep inside, it's going to be a really difficult task to get rid of racism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad Melissa mentioned earlier about like in college days is when she started like really getting into some of these things. And it's like our educational process. We need to name some of these things, like how it becomes whitewashed, how history is taught in a one-sided way, where real history and some of the things that have happened is not mentioned. And sometimes it's so easy to repeat the mistakes of the past when you have you don't know. And Sheryl Sandberg says that you can't become what you don't see. And so if you have no point of reference, if in your socialization into our society, it's just been one way and you do not know, then that becomes your frame of reference. And so in certain ways, we see racism perpetuate itself because racism is taught. And I know it becomes some of these problematic things to say, but in our lives in society, we always look up to moral exemplars. And so people push past it down. You imitate people, you learn from people, especially when you were a child. And so racism, in my opinion, and people can push back, is taught in certain ways. And so that's why we talk about we need to be anti-racist, because we need to unlearn so much. There's so much unlearning that needs to be done because of the way we are socialized. And so again, like that reference point of how do we socialize the upcoming generation to be anti-racist and not be in the same norm and current that we've been seeing over the years.
Yeah, it's like you keep saying, Andrew, it's acknowledging that it's going to cost us something, because the status quo keeps going when I do nothing. And when I just blissfully carry on and don't participate, again, as a white person, like BIPOC folks don't have that privilege. And so for me, it's cost me relationships. It's cost me people thinking that I'm crazy and pushy and reactive, and you know, that I hate white people. Right? You get all of those kinds of reactions. It's cost me emotional energy, time investment. You know, those are the things that you have to be willing to commit. And that is a so small cost for me to pay compared to the cost that it is inflicting on communities of color through centuries. So really it's that, like you said before, Vivi, that process of sanctification and repentance. Like, I'm going to commit to this daily, and it's going to cost me something. And it's supposed to cost me something, because like we were saying, the status quo is maintained by that inaction. So it's going to cost me the repercussions of me being disruptive.
Right. That's a good word, disruptive. Yeah.
Definitely.
It's interesting though. I mean, we of course would like to live in a world that is perfect, but unfortunately we are not perfect. And one of the things that, because, for instance, Andrew, you were talking about how we learn, the history that we have learned. Like just a simple example, like Pocahontas. What we have learned about Pocahontas. I mean, even this they have taught us false notions. And when you build a country in a very nice and covered foundation, you're going to be living a lie the rest of your lives. And I think that's what's happening here. And it's been for so long that to break that lie is going to cost big, because now if we decide to break all those lies for more than 400, 500 years, how do you do that? You will have to change all the history books. You will have to change all the laws that have been happening for years and years and years and years. And people are not willing to do that. I mean, if we can see it just in organization, in jobs, I mean, they even changed the guidelines, if you want to call it that way, but in the behavior, it's still the same. So is our goal to become a society that is anti-racist, or is our goal just for me to be an anti-racist person so the other person can be an anti-racist? Then the other, how can we solve this situation?
that is, there's a yeah, that's the $1 million question there. But I think if I want to take a quick stab, I think in learning about sort of racism, anti-racism, there's, I would say, those 4 quadrants. Like there are levels of it. There's individual racism, there's systemic, there's institutional racism. There are different levels of that. So I think our commitment needs to be, yes, as an individual, you make that commitment. But at the end of the day, people make culture. Culture don't make people. And so as individuals, if we make those commitments, we are the same individuals who sit at those various places that form the culture, that forms the system. And so you need to be able to make that individual commitment, but that individual commitment needs to shine through wherever you are. Because again, people make culture, people make systems, people make laws, people institutionalize these things. And so there are different varying systems you can look at in sort of being active anti-racism, anti-racist, and being like disruptors, like what Melissa was saying. But I think there are different levels you approach it. And as an individual, if you make that commitment, that's what we're saying, it's beyond the reaction versus the commitment. You make that commitment, well, you take it a step further. You put yourself, you are in situations where you're able to call racism. And even right now, sometimes we're having all these debates on what even racism is, but that's not the point. Like, you need to be able to call out racist acts. You need to be able to make that commitment. And it's not just, I have read the books, I've made that, I am sitting in my couch and that's it. You need to be in your spheres of influence. And so obviously not all of us are working in Congress or in the White House or something, but you have a sphere of influence. You have your social networks, your friends. It's that commitment, it's that lifestyle, it's that journey that we are talking about. Because at the end of the day, again, people make culture. Culture don't make people. And so we can change a culture. We can change systems. The same way these systems have been institutionalized and used as tools of oppression, we can change them. And so we need to move sometimes only thinking of just the individual into how do we harness the individual into that collective whole to be able to overhaul some of these institutionalized systems of racism. So I think it goes hand in hand, Vivi, for that question. I know, Melissa, if you have anything you want to add to that particular one.
Yeah, we're gonna get close to closing, but I mean, so not recipe, but what do you think, what kind of advice would you give, Melissa, to your white friends, to your white family, to everyone that is white in this country? like advice, not recipes.
So I can speak to what I have done, which is to be more intentional about surrounding myself with voices that are not like my own. You know, I think it's really important for us white folks to consider whose books am I reading? Whose podcasts do I listen to? Whose music do I listen to? What causes do I give to? Where do I shop? You know, all of those questions. I think it's really important that we start bringing into our own fields of influence, like for those things that influence us, to bring in voices of color, voices unlike my own, and also to be following the lead of people of color. You know, maybe you of course can continue to support the nonprofit organization that does charity or that does development, but what about the nonprofits that really dig at systemic change, that really dig at making policy change, that dig out root causes to systemic injustices, and especially those led by groups of color, by people of color. It's long overdue that we white folks begin to intentionally trust and listen to the leadership of those unlike ourselves, and to be quiet as we listen.
Yeah.
One quick thing I would say there is, I know in the beginning I did mention the idea that your proximity to marginalized people does not make you immune to racism, but proximity exceptionally matters. Like, I think that is the first step. Again, if your conditioning and your socialization and where you find yourself has given you a narrow tunnel vision of what is, you need to break through from it to see. And so I think proximity to issues, proximity to what's happening matters. Again, when you find yourself in that proximity, I think what the caution I was given earlier is do not feel that gives you that immunity, but it's a very exceptional and needed first step to be close to, because you begin to hear that, wow, this is not how I thought the world was. And we are relational beings. We are storied beings. We don't live in isolation. And so proximity to people of color matters in this work, for you to be able to take direction from them when needed, for you to be able to listen, and to be able to share certain experiences that enhance and improve each other. So just wanted to add that to sort of what's the advice? How do we move beyond that sort of just a reactionary thing to a commitment idea?
Let's see, we have some questions in here. We have one that it says, what pitfalls should I avoid when approaching Black parents at my school to hear what experiences of racism they have experienced at my Christian school? Are you able to grab the question too, below where it says question and answer?
Yes, we see that. I just right off the bat, I think what I would say is, like, to the point that we're saying of relationship matters. I think if you do not know that person, when you are walking into that space, you are walking into with so many assumptions, and I think it's important to be able to develop relationship. And so I think one if I should name a pitfall, is that you should not walk in with assumptions. You should not walk in with, because I think that has been one factor on how some of these conversations are gone in a totally different direction. So I think you need to prepare yourself. I think developing a relationship with that person, especially because I think from the question, you're hoping for a sustainable relationship. And so you need to start developing that relationship with that person And then you can go into asking those questions, because not all, no sort of race is a monolith. Not all Black people are the same. Not all Asians are the same. And so you can't go in with like a different frame of reference. So I think just developing that relationship with that person, and sometimes asking the question and being prepared that sometimes you will make those mistakes in developing those relationships, but having the grace and humility to move forward, I think is key too.
Yeah, yeah.
I think one thing I would add to that is simply believe them.
Right.
When they tell you about their experiences with racism, it's really vulnerable and trusting that they told you that. And so I think the appropriate posture is to believe them, because we always talk about like the intent versus the impact, right? Like if a person of color says this had a racist impact on me, then that's what stands. And that's what needs to be worked with and received as a white recipient, just to say, I believe you and I'm so sorry, and how can we move forward together?
Yeah, because there could be one situation, and by white people be interpreted in one way, and people of color, I'm going to interpret it and feel it in a different way. And that doesn't mean that these people are weak or something, or these people are stronger. But in order for us to know that you are interpreting and feeling it differently, I need to know you. I need to know your heart. I need to know your soul. I need to know your thoughts. And that only comes as we talk to each other and willing to learn from the other, right? Because otherwise, how I'm gonna know you? I don't know if we have some more questions in here. Yeah, I have more questions. The second question: do you have suggestions of mutual aid organization we could give to?
It depends on where you are.
Yeah.
I would say that it depends on where you are, and sort of doing your research in that way to see which organizations that you can give to, I would say.
Yeah. There's another question by Joshua Carrigan. I still can't read too well. My site is not 100% yet. By the blood of Jesus, we can look like Jesus.
Do you want me to read it?
Yes.
So Joshua asked, by the blood of Jesus, we can look like Jesus, holy as he is holy. So do not do anything Jesus would not do. He loved all, therefore, if looking like him, we love all. Why, as Christians, are we assuming that we are racist? We are a new creation and live righteous by faith. So why are we assuming sin in our lives post Christ? Thank you for your responses.
Well, it's like asking, well, Jesus paid for all my sin. Why do I have to pay? Why do I have to sacrifice? Because we're still sinners, right? Jesus died for us. Yes, he paid everything, but we are still in this nature. We are still in this body, and we still sin. And that's why we are still racist. Unfortunately, as we are still liars, as we are still, I mean, you can have the list. Jesus forgave that, it's true. But every day, I don't behave as an absolute, perfect, pure person, or I do that. Do I behave every single day at night in my dreams and everything like a pure, completely person? Like Jesus did, for instance, perfect?
I think the difference is that we don't have to live in the shame of the sin that we still walk in, right? Like I'm still going to do or say racist things. And by God's grace, I can bring that to the foot of the cross, and bring that to those that I've harmed and say, forgive me, Lord, I repent. Help me know how to move forward in this in ways that aren't harmful. Show me, give sight to my blindness.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why, again, it's a process, it's a journey. Every single day we have to ask for forgiveness because we do sin every single day. We still have time for another question. Maybe you can read.
Why? Andrew, you want to read the wise radical?
Right.
Yes. Let me pull that up. So it says, why is it radical to stop racism, white supremacy? Excuse me. Why is it considered militant to protect self against racism, white supremacy? If I can, I think we live, I don't think we have the time to unpack the culture we live in right now in the times that we find ourselves. But I think racism is pervasive. Racism is violent. And so going against the current and going against the norm, you are tagged with those sort of, you are radical, you are crazy, you are all the stuff that people throw at you. But I think it comes down to what is happening. Like that, I think sometimes we are lost in this discourse and talking about it sometimes, which is great. We need to be talking about this, but sometimes people of color do not even have the luxury of the debate and the discourse, because sometimes it is fatal. Sometimes you become a hashtag, you become a viral moment, you become the next person that people are marching and protesting. And so I think the violent nature of racism and the effects and consequences of racism that sometimes leave fatal consequences requires a kind of push of eradication, of being better, because the system itself is violent. And I don't think we should hear me wrong, and I'm advocating for this crazy uprising overtaken in even the medical field. When you have an aggressive cancer, the surgeon goes in with an aggressive technique and approach. And so the system we're in, for people of color specifically, is aggressive. It is fatal. And so in approach to be anti-racist, we cannot dilly-dally. I think we need to be equally aggressive in trying to call out certain things, in pushing ourselves to be better, because it is fatal for some people. It is not just like, oh, a pay gap or someone said this racist thing to me. Sometimes you pay, again, the cost factor with your life. And so I think sometimes when you're going against the current, you get branded with you're militant, you're radical, you're crazy, with all these branding. But people are angry because lives are being lost to racism. Just like lives are being lost to the pandemic, lives are being lost to racism. And so you cannot police people's reaction and anger, because biblically even there is space for lament. And so you cannot police what people feel when people are angry and want aggressive measures, because they don't have the luxury of having a discourse, because sometimes they do not walk away with their lives. So I think that's just my quick take on that. It's an aggressive, violent system we live in, and people attack that in an equally matched way, so to speak.
There's a couple more questions. Maybe Melissa, you can read the one that it says.
Yeah, I'm just,
We have the one, S. Smith. If I live in the Glasgow.
oh, if I live in Scotland and the church here harbors perpetual racist ideology, even the senior pastor said in an online church service when acknowledging George Floyd's death, the sermon was ended with, maybe white privilege exists, maybe it doesn't. Why can't the church, maybe he meant to say, why can't the church name this sin within itself?
Yeah, it seems that there's a word
A word missing. Yeah, so I don't know. Should we go to the next question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see that.
Andrew mentions humility as central to being anti-racist. Where culturally are we encouraging humility? Even in the church, it seems culturally out of fashion. What does this look like practically? Is it helpful to combating racism to get at the root of narcissism and triumphalism?
Yeah, just to clarify, I think when I was talking about humility earlier, I was talking about having in your decision to move in this direction of being an anti-racist, is adopting that humility posture that sometimes you would make mistakes, and that mistake should not stop you. Because sometimes when we are confronted with the huge thing, you're like, oh, I messed up, or I said something, so I've given up. I'm walking away from the fight. And so I think that was the nuance point I was trying to make in terms of there is a humility posture you need to have in doing the work, that you are not perfect. Even the most active anti-racist, you have to be humble because you're going to make mistakes. And so that was the point I was trying to make with that. And I think that we need to know that when we are confronted with those issues or situations that leave us feeling exposed, vulnerable, not to live in that shame, like what Melissa was saying. It's to get up the next day and say, we're doing this and we're moving forward. So it's important to have that. But I do think that, yes, we need to, there isn't one cookie cutter version of like, this is what makes it. I think there's discernment you need to have in certain situations. Sometimes you need to calm yourself. Sometimes I need to calm myself as a person of color to talk with someone, because I know the person is an ally, the person made a mistake, and I need to work with that person. Sometimes I need to be aggressive and say, no, call it out, because the consequences are dire. So I think there's a kind of discernment we need to embody as we move forward with that, so.
Yeah. Well, there's one more question and then we're gonna have to close.
I think the last one was just a comment.
Oh, okay.
But I think,
I'm patriotic.
yeah, I think what to bounce off of what Andrew said, like with this team right here, I have been on the receiving end of some of that loving and gracious correction, and I will admit that it left me feeling ashamed, like crap, I should have gotten this right by now, like I'm really trying, I'm really but that's when you know that you're doing the work, and you're putting yourself into and through the journey, and you have to keep leaning into that. And I'm just so grateful to be surrounded by folks, by colleagues, by people of color that that won't let it slide if there's something that I bring forth that is problematic, and I've got to push through that shame and just say, nope, this is helping me grow. This is helping me grow towards something that is ultimately helping us create a better, more equitable society. Like, if my discomfort is the meager sacrifice towards that, like, I can do that. I will do that.
Yeah. Well, incredible. The times go so fast, but let's
I
keep
know.
continue talking about this. I mean, let's not give up to start with. We
Mhm.
are going to make mistakes. We are human beings. We're not perfect. And that's okay. That's okay. As long we keep going forward, right?
Yep.
This webinar is being recorded, so it's going to be available. We will just please keep looking in our website, and you will be able to get the recording. And if you have more questions, please also send it to us. We're more than happy to answer the questions. And in name of Melissa and Andrew, thank you very much for participating in this webinar.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And thank you all for the lively discussion that was happening in the chat as well. Like we said, this is a journey and it's a commitment, and we need to keep moving forward in that commitment with grace, humility, and with some aggression as well. I think it's a mixture of everything and discerning when is the right moment to make those
Right.
calls for that. So
Yeah.
thank you all for having us, and we look forward to more further conversations.
Exactly. Okay, goodbye. See you
Thanks,
soon, hopefully.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.